out of it. They've just got to go down to the Melbourne hairpin, out of it, up the hill, round.
の混乱をよそに圧倒的なリードを奪い独走するスティーブはそのままゴール。
Slides very wide. Duncan Heisman takes second place as Jürgen Müller wins, and for the German it is win number 3.
The BMW M3. There is zero chance that you haven't heard the name. It's regularly called one of the greatest driving cars of all time. And the E46 M3? Well, it's probably just one of the greatest cars ever made. That's why I have owned not one, but two of these mythical beasts. Chances are you have one in your ideal garage. It's been on the cover of video games. It's been the subject of more Top Gear episodes than anything other than the Robin. And if you ever get the chance to drive one, beware. It's gonna ruin pretty much every other car that you've ever driven. What's up guys? This is Ideal Cars. My name's Danger, and today we're gonna take a look at what makes the M3 so special. And having previously owned 7 M cars, I'm pretty excited about this video. So watch the whole thing because you're gonna learn a lot today, and buckle up, let's go. Okay, now, I'm prepared for the flame wars. Just be sure to be kind to each other. All of the M3s are great. I promise. The E46, well, it is the best, but they're all great. And if we're gonna talk about them, we should start talking about them from the beginning. Now, the first M cars were only built for the racetrack. And back in 1972, while HP was inventing the first scientific calculator, BMW's motorsports division, yeah, that's what the M stands for, was hot rodding passenger cars for the European Touring Car Championships. But they were also working on a secret little project with an Italian camera and pasta inventor who was the one, the only Giorgetto Giugiaro, who in addition to inventing pasta, which he has the perfect name for that, is famous for designing cars like the Maserati Ghibli, the DeLorean, and the Mark I Golf. With Giugiaro's help, BMW's M division built their very own race car, which is very creatively named the M1. Wait, what is that? We actually have a video on the one that was owned by Paul Walker. Oh, go check that out up here. Because the M1 is very special, but it took so long to develop that by the time they actually made it onto the track, the Porsches and Mercedes teams had already stepped up their game to the next level. So the M1 sadly wasn't really all that competitive. It was one of the best driving supercars of the era, but because it didn't do great in racing, its era was only from 1977 to 1979. Then BMW started messing around a little bit. They made the M5 by sticking the M1 engine into a 5 Series, but it wasn't until 1986 that they struck gold.
Now this is a titanic battle between Mercedes and BMW. Both are desperate to win. BMW now, first and second.
Will Hoy is winning. His lead is down to 10 seconds. This is the last corner. It's going to be Frank Sittner's 5th win this year.
He takes the checkered flag, and it's Jacques Lafitte, the winner.
See, BMW really wanted to race, but the rules said that they had to make 5,000 cars for the public. BMW, well, they weren't okay with just souping up a normal 3 Series. They wanted to win. They wanted to develop a real race car, not just pretend it was upgraded for the track. So the M division went to the accountants and begged for some money. And against all odds, the bean counters went, "Do it! Just go to the shed and build the car that will win more races than any other of the era and sell it to the public." And they conquered. Enter the E30 M3. It's not just a boxy 3 Series with a peppy motor. In fact, they only had like a couple of body panels in common with the 3 Series they were based on. Most of the body was plastic to save weight, with wide hips to hide wide tires that it needed to put down all 200 horses. And yeah, 200 horses, it's not a lot, but it's a total case of numbers, not telling the whole story. You see, the E30 is one of the best driving cars of the 80s. Now, hear me out. The E30 M3 drives like a modern sports car, and nothing else from the era still holds up like that. An IROC Camaro, they're just rusty death traps now. A Mark III Supra, they weigh north of 500 pounds more, and you can feel every pound in the corners. Meanwhile, the M3 Coupe is regularly included in lists talking about the top 5 cars of all time. And it's a little car with a dogleg transmission and a magical four-banger. And it's regularly known to be preferred over cars like the Lamborghini Diablo when you're talking about driving experience, not curb appeal. So if you want the ultimate driving machine, well, that's why you buy an E30 M3. But you've been warned that you can pay more for an M3 now than you could for the same era Diablo. Yeah, really, here's a chart from Bring a Trailer that shows that prices are regularly creeping past $100,000. Good news, the follow-up, the E36 M3 is a whole lot cheaper. And in my experience, it's honestly a better driving experience.
Subdued elegance, innovative technology, and a strong inline 6-cylinder.
But the second gen M3, which started in 1992 in Europe, introduced a lot of things that we think is standard for the M3, like a buttery smooth inline 6 motor, an optional SMG transmission, again, that was just for the European cars, plus a great interior. You can see the legendary E46 outlined in the E36. See, the E30 M3 was more race car than Grand Tour. The E36, however, had some fanciness to it. You could even get it with wood grain if you got the Lux package. And I don't know why anybody would have opted for that, because I don't even know why that's a thing. Who wants dead trees in their car? The E36 had luxury in addition to power, which has become a staple of modern BMWs. But I think that the biggest thing about the E36 is that they haven't exploded in value yet. I truly believe that they're the best M3 that you can buy for the money, or just best bang for your buck, since you can still find them for less than 15 grand in relatively decent condition. And people always ask me what the best track car you can buy is. Or what you need to start drifting. Or what's a good project car just to start with? And the answer is this, an E36 M3. I don't care if Miata is always the answer. For the price, nothing drives like an E36. It has amazing 50-50 weight distribution, making it slide effortlessly. And your friends will think that you were just born gifted. And having owned 3 E36 M3s, I know for a fact that, well, they fit directly into the ideal car strategies, which I've built to teach you how to drive your dream car and make money enjoying it. So if you want to go check out our free webinar on 7 secrets to drive your dream car and make money, well, click up here, because the E46, the E36, and even the E90, E92s fit into this strategy perfectly. And back to the E36, they do have one problem though. BMW made it a great touring car when they built the E36 M3. They perfected it in the year 2000 with the E46 M3. And as anyone who has ever had an overachieving younger sibling, well, they'll tell you that it's a big hurdle to overcome. What's the deal with the E46? Why is every car from the 90s worth way more than their newer counterparts? Except for the M3. Why is one considered the pinnacle of M3 and the other is just an aging 90s performance car? 3 digits, S54. That's the engine code for the E46 M3. And that means the E46 M3 makes roughly 100 horsepower more than the E36. And that's a huge jump. Especially since they're both naturally aspirated. So when you combine the extra power with the way more comfortable interior and updated go-fast parts like bigger brakes, better suspension, and better wheel and tire combinations, you end up with a car that literally is the definition of the ultimate driving machine. Some people even argue the E46 is the best looking BMW. And well, do you agree? Tell me in the comments. Personally, after owning a couple E46 M3s, I had a really tough time biting the bullet and buying an E90. I just didn't think that they looked as cool. And when you go back to the E36, most people don't know that they shared all the same body panels and bodywork as the regular E36 3 Series. So there was really nothing to tell them apart to the common bystander than, well, the M badge on the back, which someone could totally up badge their 3 Series. But the E46 M3, it just looked special. It felt special. And when it showed up, you knew it was an M car. And I think one of my favorite parts about it are those side gills, which is a throwback to the 3-liter CSL. They really thought of everything when designing the E46 M3. And it truly shows the passion of the M Motorsports division. Plus, to put this all into perspective, you have to look at what was competing with the E46. And quickly you realize at the time, nothing could touch it in terms of price or performance. Because if you were looking at cars that were in the same price range, you're looking at a Boxster S, which an M3 just leaves in the dust. And if you wanted the engine in the back with your Porsche, well, a 911 was double the price of an M3, and the M3 still held its own against it, even with direct competitors like the Audi RS6 and the Mercedes C32. They were just straight outclassed by the Bavarian monster. And lucky for you, if you want one, well, we have a whole video about it right up here. And by using the strategies, you can expect to pay anywhere from 20 to 25K for a driver, or if you're willing to settle for a ragtop. And the good news is that BMW, well, they made a ton of E46s, so if you can turn a wrench, you can get a fake M3 for a lot less than a real one, and you still get to experience most of that unreal driving experience. My favorite non-M E46 is essentially the 4-door M3, which is the ZCP. And it's a detuned M3 with slightly lower suspension, and you can get it in a 6-speed manual. And if you just wanna get into something with those beautiful E46 lines, well, you can get something as simple as like a 328i for under $5,000. And it's not like they're slow cars, they just, well, they're not insane. Now, we unfortunately didn't get the holy grail of E46 M3s, which was the M3 CSL. It was a special edition and it weighed less and it made more power. Plus you could get the E46 M3 GTR, which you know is the one that was on the cover of the video game we all played and wish they would remake. The M3 GTR deserves its own video, honestly. It was basically BMW trying to cheat their way to victory by dropping a huge V8 into an E46. Then they made it a mile wide, just look at that girth, and gave it more downforce than a Formula 1 car. Then they pretended to sell it to the public to meet homologation rules. And yeah, pretty much every night I dream about driving one. I really want to drive one. Unfortunately, if the E46 is the peak of the M3, the only place is to go down. And in the late 2000s, that's where BMW just kind of, well, they just kind of lost their way. Now, don't get me wrong. I owned an E90 M3 and I thoroughly enjoyed it, other than the lack of low-end torque, which made it kind of hard to drive in the city. But the E90, E92, and E93 generation M cars are not bad cars at all. I mean, they come with a V8 and they are wicked fast. And trust me, it's hard to find anyone that would turn down driving one at the track. And yes, that V8 is a monster compared to that inline 6, and it sounds absolutely unbelievable straight piped. Plus, even if you don't get a manual, you still get a really solid transmission because BMW switched to the dual clutch for their automatic transmissions. And in fact, I think the DCT suits that V8 motor a little bit better. Now, the problem with the E90X M3s, it was the start of the electronic everything BMW era. And they really are a departure from what made the original M3s so special. It's also when the M badge started to kind of lose its meaning because, well, BMW started sticking it on anything and everything. You had things like the X5M because soccer moms for some reason needed a ton of horsepower and a special footrest. That's part of why the E46 continues to just be so special in my mind and my heart. It's from a time when the M badge was sacred and not just plastered on anything. And just because the M name was a little bit more diluted with the E9X, it didn't mean that it was any less potent. Personalities like Jeremy Clarkson never shut up about the E92 M3, and he called it the most complete car ever. It's not as raw as the E36, and it may not look as good as the E46, but if you're comparing it to the competition, well, it's still leagues above. It is an M car through and through, and here's one for 26 grand, which is about what you'll pay for one in decent condition. And a car that a lot of people will look for when cross-shopping an M3 is a B7 RS4, which I highly suggest drive both, and you'll definitely be swayed to the E9XM. The Quattro all-wheel drive in the RS4 and just how much it weighs makes it kind of feel more like a boat than a sports car. Where on the other hand, the E9XM carries its 3,700-ish pounds very well and feels totally like a sports car. But if you need all-wheel drive because you love snowboarding, well then the RS4 might be your golden ticket. But I would just get some Blizzaks and rip up the mountain in an E9XM3. And one thing you'll definitely want to be careful of is if you get a newer BMW, well, it's going to be a little bit less reliable and you won't be able to work on it as much yourself. Yeah, and I know this is pretty much the opposite of how it should be, but all those complicated electrics are super prone to failure, especially the iDrive system, which I absolutely hated in mine. And speaking of unreliable, following the E92s are the F80s, which came out in 2014. Now, on paper, there's a ton to like about these M3s and M4s. They have a turbocharged inline six and they are fast as like the E30 M3 could do 0 to 60 in like 7 seconds, and the F80 can do it in 4. And for now, we're gonna let other people argue whether or not the turbos ruined the M3 name because, well, it's really only half an M3 anyway. They split the car into two. Instead of offering a 4-door or a 2-door M3, they named the 4-door M3 the M3 and called the 2-door M3 the M4. Get it? Because the one with 4 in the title has 2 doors and the one with 4 doors is called the 3. It all makes sense in BMW land, I guess. Plus, these cars, well, they got pretty big. The E9X was already pushing it, but these F8Xs are, well, they're from a different planet. I mean, they're as big or bigger than an early 2007 series. And it's almost entirely fly-by-wire, which makes them impossible to maintain. Now, the F80s are newer enough that they're still a little bit pricey. You can get one in the 40s all day long, and it's still an amazingly fast car for the price. It's just the F80s don't really feel like an M3 anymore. This is something that's kind of hard to describe, but cars, well, they have a personality. Let me explain. A Honda Civic Si, it just kind of feels like a Honda. You just know exactly how it will behave the minute you get into it. And the M3, it has a soul like that. It's just German instead of Japanese. All you have to do is think about flicking the M3 into a turn and it just does it. The power, it's perfectly linear because, well, the steering's pretty much telepathic. And that can be said for every generation until the F80 M3s and F82 M4s. It started with the E90s, but the M3 really lost the M3 feel with this newer gen. And don't get me wrong, they're all amazing cars, but if you really want to drive, like really enjoy the driving experience of these cars, I really think the E30, E36, E46, and kind of the E9X all have that driver's first mentality. And personally, I don't even think the F80 and F82 should be the M3 and M4. I think the real successor of the E9X is the M2.
Well, at least he admitted it. He knows it's bad.
Now, hear me out. The M1 and M2 are the same size as the E46. They have fewer nanny devices and a lot less weight. And if I'm really honest, yeah, they look a whole lot better. Now, pop the hood and you have that same 3-liter turbocharged motor that's found in the F80 M3. It's not tuned like the M3 motor is, so you don't get as many ponies to play with. But the M2, it's lighter. So they actually scoot down the quarter mile in about the same amount of time. Now, the secret is definitely out, so there aren't any real good deals on M2s, but they do tend to be a little bit cheaper than M3s, and you can find a clean one for under 40K, like this one. And I don't think it's a bad deal, especially when, you know, you have Daddy Doug DeMuro calling it the ultimate M car.
And it is the best BMW M car.
And speaking of M3s, there's a new M3 on the block. And will it be able to reclaim the crown? Not in the looks department. With some colors, it looks okay, as long as that color is black. Because those grills, well, it's an acquired taste. But the G80 M3, which is the 6th and most current generation of M car, makes up for the ugly by being really, really fast and really, really poised. Now, I haven't gotten behind the wheel of one yet, but when I do, I definitely will make a video telling you guys all about it. But from everything that I've read and heard, everybody says that this thing is amazing. You get 473 horses on the base model and more than 500 for the competition trim. And so that makes it the most powerful M3, even if it's only the base although the base might be the one that you actually want to get since the base model only comes with a manual. And the fact that, well, the G80 still comes with a manual, it's just nice to know that BMW hasn't totally lost their way yet. Plus the M3 is still rear wheel drive, or like I like to say, right wheel drive. This thing is essentially a street legal race car that represents the best that a sedan can be. Even though it weighs more and is bigger than the F80, people are saying that the driving experience is more like the God King E46 than anything else. And so I'm excited to start seeing them on the road, especially since the M3 has once again become one of the highest performance cars that you can buy for the money. And I know it's a lot of money, but this is what I just spent on a Jeep. So 70 grand, I know it's not pocket change, but that's a heck of a bargain for one of the best driving cars ever. And it can absolutely hang with some very, very expensive exotics like the McLaren 570S. And well, you don't want your friends to leave you behind, so the G80 might be perfect. So will it hold up and get the respect of the elder M cars, or will it just hold up to the E46? I guess we'll get back to you in, let's say, 5 years. And so, if you've made it this far, you obviously love M cars, which we here at Ideal love M cars as well. So, which one is your favorite? Let us know in the comments. And be a little bit specific. Tell us your ideal spec. So like an E46 M3 ZCP. That would be my ideal spec for an M car. And I know I have those nostalgia glasses on, and I think it might be time for me to add another M car to the collection. I just don't know what yet. And well, if you love us, then go snag a t-shirt, rep the brand. You guys absolutely rock, and well, these videos, they make my day. No, seriously, I love making them for you. So, if you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, and if you're new here, please subscribe and turn on this notification bell. It'll let you know when we make a new video. My name's Danger, this is Ideal Cars, and keep living the ideal lifestyle.